Hi, my name's Anne Grace. I've been sewing gowns for 4Everly years, the Southern Ontario Angel Gown Group, for about a year now. But there doesn't seem to be a video tutorial for the cocoons that I sew, so I'm going to go into that today. The cocoon patterns is the Caring Hand cocoon, and it's available on the 7 Pines Design Facebook group. If you look under the files in the 7 Pines Design Facebook group, you'll find it in there. So once you've got the file, you go ahead and print it out. You can use regular printed paper. I prepare this freezer paper. I've had this for a while. I get it for quilting. It's a fabric paper, but it's backed with wax because it's intended to wrap up meat for the freezer. But it's quite resilient. I can use the pattern over and over again before I need to print out another copy. Whereas with regular printer paper, you can probably only use it for a few times before your pins end up ripping it to shreds. I'm going to be making a 9-inch cocoon today, so I'll go ahead and cut out the pieces that I need. There's 5 sheets in the pattern. I'll go ahead and cut them out and glue the bits to each other that need to be glued, because I don't know where my sellotape is. This is Prit Stick. I get it imported from the UK because it's the glue I know and trust. Elmer's glue does pretty much the same thing, it's just not as strong. So I would recommend sellotape if you don't have Prit Stick. So now it's all cut out and glued together. We've got the main body of the cocoon and the blanket, and then there's a pillow cover and a pillow stuffing. I've got to confess, most of the time I just use these two and I don't bother with the wee pillow and the pillow stuffing, but I'll show you how to make them all. So now we've got the pattern ready, we're going to go ahead and gather all the things, all the materials that we need. So the first thing handy on my desk is ribbons. Now I've already cut a bunch of ribbons to get them ready, but you're taking I think it's about 1/4 inch ribbon. Let me check that. I think it's 1/4 inch. Yep, 1/4 inch ribbon. I mean, I suppose you could use any width of ribbon, but I tend to buy reels of the 1/4 inch. So you're doing 8-inch lengths of ribbon, and then you're heat sealing the end, just running under the lighter so it doesn't fray at the ends, because nylon ribbons want to fray. So next we gather our materials to make the dress. I've got pink fleece for the lining of the cocoon, and I've got some pink satin here from a bridesmaid dress that was donated. You can use any wedding dress that was donated. I've got some lace trim off another wedding gown, and this ruffly lace from another donated gown. I haven't decided what I'm going to use. I'll cut out the outer body of the cocoon and then I'll trial the trims against it and see what I like best. So you're going to ignore the selvage because nobody needs anything made with all the pinholes in it. Smooth out your fabric. We've got 2 layers here on top of each other, and we're just going to pin the cocoon with as least waste as possible, fairly close to the edges of the fabric. And then you take your fabric scissors this time. These ones are my old fabric scissors. They got relegated to paper scissors so I can cut out my patterns with them. These are my fabric ones. Just ignore my children if you can hear them. They're upstairs. It's Saturday and they're home from school. Okay, so that's the lining of the cocoon, pins and cut out. So I'm going to go ahead and pin the curve. It's just easier to sew if the curves pinned together. I'll set that one to the side, and we will go ahead and pin out the pillow cover and the pillow liner. This one's actually only supposed to be a single layer. I've accidentally cut out two, but I'll just save that other layer for the next one. I'm going to add 2 pins to the corners of the blanket because it gets sewn like a pocket, so it gets sewn up, over and back down again. So I just pin the 2 top corners so I know that this is the end I'm leaving open. And the pillowcase is going to be the same. We're going to go up the side, along the top, and back down the bottom. So for the pattern pieces, the outer body is going to get made in the outer fabric, and these can all get set to the side because these were just from fleece. Okay, now we're going to sew them together, the fleece parts. My machine's threaded with white Cocoon thread. I prefer to use a stitch bunny or a leader and ender, I think they call them in quilting. My machine's quite old and a little temperamental, so I find that if I don't use a stitch bunny, it's just a wee bit of fabric that you stretch over and over again. Anyway, I find if I don't use one of them, my threads get tangled underneath. So we've got bobbin thread in there, so we'll just start stitching it. Okay, so now it's away from the needle. We just put in the end. For this blanket section, I do a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I just go backwards at the start. When I get close to a 1/4 inch away from the end, I leave the needle down, lift the presser foot up, rotate the fabric, and sew until we're a 1/4 inch away from the other end, taking the pins out as I go because I don't sew over pins. And we're going to sew down the last end, leaving this end open, and we're going to back stitch at the end here, so when you turn it inside out, there's no risk of the seam just popping open. The last thing I'm going to do is put my stitch bunny back in and snip off for this. Okay, so the next step of making the blanket is to trim these corners. If you look where the seams are, we just want to cut close to the seams but not through the seams, so that we get a super neat corner when we pop it inside out. I say super neat, but it's made of fleece, so it's only so neat. You can only get fleece so pointy. It's not like it's a satin or a cotton. Anyway, we pop it inside out, and you use something pointed but not sharp to poke out the corner. I normally just use the end of these scissors because they're pointy but they're not sharp. And use that to poke the corner out. And that is it for the blanket. It's literally all you do. Just sew up 3 sides, turn it inside out. Next we're going to sew up the wee pillowcase, and it's just the same. Back stitch at the start, up the side, round the top, back down again, back stitch at the bottom. Just take your time going round the curve if you're not used to sewing curves. Snip it off. Okay, so this one there's no corners to clip because it's a curved piece, but we are just going to snip the curve just so where it overlaps on the inside, you don't end up with a super thick bit. It sits neater if the curves are clipped. So just about every 1/4 inch I'm making a wee snip, but not all the way to the stitching. You can just about see, I think. And that'll make it sit neater. It's not the end of the world if you don't, it just does sit near. And then we turn it inside out, right side out actually. And again, we'll just go round the curve. Whoop. You can use a chopstick or a blunt pencil or something. It's probably far less risky than using your scissors. I just never remember to bring one down. Okay. And next what we're going to do is take the wee bit of felt lining, which is the pillow stuffing, and we're going to put it inside and try and take it to the end and make it lay flat. Just take your time, it takes a wee while to make it actually lay flat inside. Okay, and then once it's flat, we're going to tuck the ends in. And you have the option to either pin it and sew it, or just hand stitch it with like a ladder stitch. Sorry, I took that away there, didn't realise. So we're just tucking it to the inside to make it neat, and you can either machine sew it or hand sew it. I'm just going to run it through the machine. And they call it a pillow in a pillowcase. It goes on the inside of the little cocoon. As I say, I don't often do this step because, I don't know, it takes a wee bit longer and the cocoon is already fleece lined. But when it's made, the pillowcase will go on the bottom and then the wee sleeping bag will go over the top. So that would hide the seam on the inside of the cocoon. So I'll put them to the side, and now we're going to sew the fleece lining for the cocoon. Now this one I do slightly different. I'm still just sewing up, but it's just the one open edge that gets sewn up. It's just from the base of the cocoon to the tip of the curve that gets sewn up. This one, instead of doing it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I do it with 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'll show you in a wee bit why. Again, you just back stitch at the start and then off you go. Okay, so we're left with this. You see it's a much bigger seam allowance than the other parts I was sewing. That's because when you, oh, my snips are being hit now. When you're putting this inside the outer fabric, the pattern pieces are the exact same size for the inner fleece and the outer fabric, but the fleece is really thick. So if you make them the exact same seam allowance, it ends up like bumping up a little on the inside of the lining. I find that if I make the seam allowance just that 1/4 inch extra, it cuts down the bulk inside the hood, and so it sits much smoother. So that's just sewing the hood and down the body of the cocoon. Now we're going to sit at the side and start on the outside fabric. So we've just got 2 pieces of outside fabric to do. It's just the cocoon main body again. Alright, so we're just pinning on the patterns with the grain. And once we've got this pinned and cut out, then we're going to trial, excuse the gas from upstairs, we're going to trial the different trims on it to see what we like the look of. Can put the satin away now because we don't need it for anything else. So we're going to take the pins out and we're going to keep the left side of the outer pattern away, and this is the outside of the fabric. So what we're going to do is we're going to see how we want the finished cocoon to look. So I've got lace trim that I've added before that could go on, and then we could sew some wee beads and things on it. That's really pretty. I've done that before. The reason I'm just trialing it this side of the cocoon outer is that this bit actually goes the underneath, so you only really see from the front, you only really see this bit. So we want the main point of interest to be kind of here. So I've got that. I've got this lacy one. It's really hard to see the pink underneath, but that's an option. I think, just for ease of viewing, we'll do the lace today. So I'm just going to add some pins. A little bit's going to disappear into the seam allowance, but I'll just trim it here and keep that for another one. So the satin from this came from a bridesmaid's dress, but this white lace came from another wedding dress. It was so heavily laced. It was all around the hem of the dress, and big panels on the skirt. It's been great. It's been so useful. I've used it for so many of the wee cocoons and little dresses. Okay, so now we're going to carefully sew through the lace and around the points, and then we'll trim it squared once we're finished sewing the lace. Now from the wrong side of the fabric, we're going to trim off the excess lace that was poking over the edges. Now you can leave this as it is, or you can add sequins and petals and whatever else you want to do to it. I'm going to hand sew some sequins and petals and come back when that's done. So we're laying up the pink bridesmaid's dress with the lace from the wedding dress, with a sequin from a different wedding dress, and AB diamantes from this headdress that was donated along with the wedding gown it came with. You just need to make sure you get the bottom within the 4 inch allowance so you don't want to have to use the when you're showing the whole thing together. You can do this afterwards, just do a couple of stitches inside the fleece if you do it afterwards, after the whole thing's assembled. But if you're unsure about placing it, you can do it afterwards. Get the sequin, and maybe a little diamante, and then back through the sequin, and then do an extra stitch underneath the sequin to secure it. And then on the next flower, through the centre of the flower, do a sequin and a bead, back through the sequin to the centre of the flower, and then secure another stitch underneath the sequin. And this time I'm not going to remove any flowers in here. So a couple more stitches just to secure the thread. The little beads and sequins added on just to give it a bit more interest. Okay, now we're going to sew the outer together, and then we're going to put the ribbons in to attach it. Ribbons in to attach it, and then we're going to sew the whole thing together. So right sides together, the two outers get pinned together, and you just have to be careful lining up the little hood section. And now I'm going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance again. Oh, it's a bit slippery, I'll add another pin. Okay, we're going to do 1/4 inch seam allowance again. And then we're going back to the start. Again, if you're not sure about sewing curves, just take your time and just slowly turn it. And that's it. Okay, so now, as with the curve of the lining, we're going to clip the curve on the outer as well. Again, it's just about 1/4 inch distances and making sure that you don't touch the actual seam line, because if you touch the seam line, you're going to have to sew it again a wee bit smaller. Okay, and you don't have to bother clipping anything going down the straight edge, it's just the curve that you need to watch. Now we're going to assemble it. So the first thing we're going to do is get the lining and put it down with the right side. So this will be the inside of the cocoon. We're going to have the cocoon inside facing up, and then we're going to add the blanket. And you can carefully measure it, but you're just doing halfway on the blanket, and the halfway is going to meet the bottom seam, and that's going to sit in place there. So now we're going to put the ribbons on. You want to not have the ribbons catch the seam allowance, so you want it maybe 1/2 inch up from the bottom edge if you're doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then we're just going to pin that in place at the edge. I like to have it poking out a wee tiny bit so that I can see. Hold on. I like to have them poking out a wee tiny bit so that you can see when you go to sew it together, you can make sure that the ribbons haven't disappeared inside. The next ribbon is going about 1/2 inch away from this top corner. So about there, and just poking out a wee bit past the edge of the fabric so that you can see it when you put the outer layer on. You just pin it to the fleece and don't jack your finger. Okay, I personally like to tuck these underneath the blanket just so that they definitely can't get sewn in another bit of the process. So now we're going to take the outside of the fabric. So this is the inside of the cocoon. You want the good side of the outer facing the good side of the lining. So it's right side to right side. And then we're going to pin through the outer, through both layers of the blanket and the lining fabric. And this is where you need sharp pins. And again, we're going to pin through the outside, the blanket, both layers of the blanket and the lining of the cocoon. Now I like to sew it fleece side down on my machine because it's a bit huffy. It's a little elderly now, but it's up to you what way. I just find that if I sew satin side down, sometimes because I'm not using a walking foot on the machine, sometimes the fleece doesn't flow at the same time as the satin, so I prefer to do it fleece side down. Okay, so now we're pinning around and just making sure the points match up for the lining and the outer fabric of the cocoon. And it's worth doing this and taking your time. If your machine isn't heavy duty and it doesn't like sewing through lace, you can always just do your appliques in the centre, or you can use iron-on bonding to put your appliques on, or you can just do thin ribbon. You'll find a way to make it pretty. You could just use a all-over lace that's a really fine lace, or you could just hand stitch bows or something on it. When I do the wee boy ones, I quite often leave them completely plain and just do blue ribbon ties to close them. And now we're matching the seams on the hood. So we've got the seam of the lining matching the seam of the outer at the top here, and I pin that before I pin the rest of the hood. And again, we're just matching corners, pinning them before we pin the rest of the curve. So I've left this stitch open, this section. It's not the side that's got the ribbons are over here, you can just see them poking out. So the ribbons are on this side. On the opposite side, we're leaving a gap that we can turn it inside out. It's called birth in sewing terms if you're making a bag or a pillowcase or anything. But that's the hole we're going to leave empty. So we're going to start here and we're going to sew and we're going to back tack here, and then we're going to sew down to the corner, along to the other corner, up to this corner, along carefully doing the curve of the hood, and back round, and we'll back stitch here again to secure it, and then we're going to turn it inside out, or right side out rather. So if you're using a stitch bunny, just let it get behind the foot. Okay. Okay, so we're starting about an inch-ish away from this bottom corner, and we're going to back stitch. We're putting it down about 4 inches away from the corner, It's worth taking your time where the little blanket is on the inside, because you're going through the outer layer of fabric, the fleece lining of the fabric, and 2 layers of blanket, so it's quite a lot for your machine to sew through. I had to tug on that there a wee bit at the bottom of the lace because there was a bead that wasn't sewn. I don't know if you can see that wee lump there. It wasn't sewn over, but it was close enough that it went underneath my foot a wee bit, and the machine didn't much like that. So okay, we're about to go over the ribbon. I like to back stitch on the ribbon even though it's not heavy duty. It's not going to be tugged on very much, it's only just going to be used to close it over the wee baby. Again, we just pivot when we're about 1/4 inch away from the corner. We just take our time going around the curves. Again, 1/4 inch away from the corner, we're going to come down and we're going to remember about that gap that we need to turn it. We're going to back stitch here to reinforce it. If there's one part where it's really important to reinforce it, it's when you're at the start and end of this opening, because there's going to be a fair bit of pressure on the fabric while you actually turn it the right side out. I'm going to snip off my stitch bunny, put it back in, and okay. Next step is clipping the corners. So on here, you've got a corner down here at the bottom, and then you've got another corner up here at the edge of the hood, another corner up here at the edge of the hood, and another one down at the bottom corner, and we're just going to clip the corner on each of those. It's not a massive bit of bulk, but like when you're working with various fabrics, the fleece and the satin together, it doesn't do any harm to clip the corners. Next thing we're going to do is clip the curve of the hood. If you can see that, it's where the here on both sides. Oh. We're going to clip the corners so that they are, clip the curve so that it sits nicely. And again, it's just about every 1/4 inch, not touching the stitching. I don't do the very top of the hood because it sits flat anyway, but I do the curves. So that's, you can see it's the curves. If you pull on it, you can see them. Okay, next we're going to turn it right side out. So you're going to reach your fingers in between the fleece lining and the satin outside, and you're going to grab, well, I normally grab this far corner and pull it through. And then you're just turning the rest inside out. And it doesn't look like much, but I'm going to take you would take your chopstick or your pencil or whatever. I'm going to take the blunt end of these scissors and I'm going to poke out the corners. So you go in through the hole that you turned it inside out of, and you should have 4 corners to poke at and a hood. And also your ribbon ties will be soundly attached because you backstitched over them. Okay, that's the 4 corners poked out. Now we're just going to sort the hood out by hand. So you just want to find the seam and sort of push at it so that the fleece sits nicely. See, this is why we did a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Let me show you. This is why we did a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the fleece, but a 1/4 inch seam allowance on the outside, because if you've got the exact same seam allowance on the inside of the hood, it can like sort of gather up a bit. It won't sit completely flat inside. Now my personal preference at this point is to do an edge stitch, or what do you call, no, not an edge stitch, a top stitch around the outside of the whole thing, to make it sit nicely. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do a top stitch, a 1/4 inch or less around the outside. That's also going to have us close up this hole. So I'm just going to pin this just now. And then we're going to go around with like less than a 1/4 inch top stitch all the way around the outside. You'll ignore the blanket will just sit out like that while you sew along here, and we'll just go all the way around the thing. We're going to play a wee game of bobbin chicken while I go around the top stitching on this, because I'm not sure how much bobbin thread that is. Okay, so you let the stitch bunny run, or you just, you know, if your machine isn't temperamental, you don't need the stitch bunny. And I'm just at the very edge of the fabric, so less than a 1/4 inch. You could do it with a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch top stitch. It's just I've got the sequins and the beads quite close to the edges here, so if I did a 1/2 inch seam allowance, it would be going right through where the beads are. So now you need to make sure that your ribbons are well out the way so that they're not getting caught underneath, because you need the ribbons to be able to tie the cocoon. Make sure the blanket's well out the way so you don't stitch over that either. So the next step is to attach the other ribbons that are going to close it up. So if you set it with the fleece side up, you put your blanket down, put the right side over to close it, and you put the left side back over the top. You can see how pretty it's going to be once it's finished. But what we need to do here is mark where the ribbons need to be. So I've done this so much that I just normally just pin it on. So you want the closed end of the ribbon, or the melted end of the ribbon, to be pointing towards the other opening, because when it's closed, when it's actually tied shut, it'll go over the top of this. So we're just going to, oh, if my pins were sharper. Okay, different pin. That one was hopeless. Okay, we're just going to pin it in, see how they would meet each other. And then we're going to do the same on this side. Keep this ribbon out the way. We can see it needs to go about here. Now, if you wanted, you could use a heat erasable pen, or a wee bit of washable pen, even a wee bit of pencil, because you're going to be stitching over the top of it anyway. But you're just pinning it into the fabric to hold it in place. And now we're going to make sure everything's out of the way again. We want these ribbons well out the way, we want the little blanket well out the way, and we're just going to carefully stitch here and here to hold it. You can definitely hand sew this if you prefer, or you can run it through the machine and just trim the threads afterwards. So I lift the needle and I put the foot right over the top of the ribbon. I put it down, and then without, I don't know if you can see, then without sewing, I don't think you can see. Okay, let me try this. Okay, I put the foot down on top of where the pin and the ribbon is. Now without sewing, I'm going to keep the ribbon in place and just remove the pin. So I'm not actually stitching on the pin, but it did hold it underneath the foot. And I'm just going to go backwards or forwards twice. And now the needle's up again, so I'm going to lift the presser foot, move the cocoon. The needle's still in the main body and the ribbon, so it's holding it in place. I'm going to put it underneath the presser foot, put the presser foot back down, right where the needle needs to sew, and then I'm going to remove this pin, and then backwards or forwards a couple of times. And I lift it up, going up, thank you, Mum. And it's like this out the side. So it looks messy at the moment because it's still got the threads attached, so we're going to carefully trim the threads without touching the ribbons or without snipping the fabric. And then flip it over, and we get the threads on this side. That's 1, 2, 3, and then this last one, 4. And that is that ready to be assembled. That's how the ribbons look when it's done. So they're just dangling down just now, but when you actually tie this, they're just dangling down just now, but when you actually tie this, they'll face this way and they'll hide where your stitching is. Okay, so we've got the main body of the cocoon, we've got a little pillow which is going inside the hood there. We put the blanket over the top and take away any wee loose threads or fluff or anything you see. You close one side of the blanket over the top, well, one side of the cocoon over the top of it, and then the other side of the cocoon over the top. And that's pretty much it. Now you're just going to tie the ribbons. So if you keep the bow up the way, if you go round the back and through the front, it makes the 2 points of the bow go up the way, like that. And there we have it, a finished little £7 Designs Caring Hands cocoon, completely finished with ribbon ties and sequins and lace and satin. So I hope you go ahead and make your own and that everything made sense, but feel free to comment below if you need any help with anything. Yeah, hopefully it worked out. I've never filmed a tutorial before, so hopefully it all made sense.